Have you ever noticed how the moment you start taking yourself seriously, the world seems to take you less seriously? You begin reading philosophy instead of scrolling. You choose discipline over comfort. You speak less but say more. And suddenly, people around you start acting different. They'll joke that you've become too deep. They'll roll their eyes when you decline that third drink. They'll ask if you're going through something, even though you've never been clearer about who you are and where you're headed. Here's what's really happening. Your growth is holding up a mirror to their stagnation. And mirrors, as the Stoics understood, don't lie. What if I told you that this discomfort, this sense of growing apart from your old life, isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong? What if it's proof that you're doing something right? The ancient Stoics faced this exact challenge 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, wrote in his private journal about feeling isolated by his commitment to virtue. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that true freedom comes with a price most people aren't willing to pay. Seneca discovered that wisdom often walks alone. They understood something that modern self-help often misses. Real strength isn't about becoming someone everyone likes. It's about becoming someone you can respect, even when, especially when, that person makes others uncomfortable. Think about the strongest person you know, not physically strong, but genuinely resilient in mind and character. I guarantee their strength wasn't built in moments of comfort and ease. It was forged in crisis, shaped by setbacks, hardened by the exact challenges they didn't want to face. They developed what the Stoics called inner citadel, that unshakable core that remains steady regardless of external storms. But here's what most people don't understand about this kind of strength. It's not something you're born with. It's something you build deliberately and systematically through specific practices that have been tested across centuries of human experience. Over the coming discussion, we're going to explore the 8 keys that separate those who grow strong from those who simply grow hard. These aren't motivational platitudes or feel-good mantras. They're battle-tested principles that have guided men and women through everything from personal crisis to leading empires. These keys will challenge you. They'll ask you to question assumptions you've held about success, relationships, and what it means to live well. They'll demand that you choose between comfort and growth, between fitting in and standing out, between being liked and being respected, including by yourself. Get comfortable, settle in. Because what we're about to discuss isn't just philosophy. It's a blueprint for building the kind of inner strength that can't be shaken, borrowed, or taken away. It's a guide to becoming dangerous in the best possible way. Someone who can't be controlled, manipulated, or broken by the inevitable challenges of life. The path we're about to walk together has been traveled by kings and slaves, philosophers and warriors, artists and entrepreneurs. What they all discovered is that true power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. And that mastery begins with understanding these 8 fundamental keys. Picture this. You're at a party, surrounded by people, but you feel completely alone. Not because you're antisocial, but because the conversations feel hollow. Everyone's talking, but nobody's saying anything. You find yourself checking your phone, not because you have messages, but because it gives you something to do with the growing realization that you'd rather be anywhere else. The noise level is overwhelming, not just the volume, but the emptiness of it all. Someone's complaining about their job for the 3rd time tonight. Another person is gossiping about someone who isn't there to defend themselves. A group is arguing about politics, but nobody's actually listening to each other. They're just waiting for their turn to speak. You look around and realize that most of these people seem to be running from something. They can't sit in silence. They fill every pause with words. They need constant stimulation, constant validation, constant proof that they matter. And suddenly you understand, they're not just avoiding being alone with others, they're avoiding being alone with themselves. Now imagine a different scene. You're at home on a Friday night. No plans, no company, just you, a book, and the quiet hum of your own thoughts. And Instead of feeling lonely, you feel content, centered, like you're exactly where you need to be. The silence isn't empty, it's full of possibility, of reflection, of the kind of deep thinking that only happens when you're not performing for anyone else. You're not checking your phone every few minutes. You're not wondering what you're missing. You're present with yourself in a way that feels both rare and necessary. This is the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of being alone. Solitude is the glory of being alone. Here's what the Stoics discovered. The man who can't be alone will always be controlled by his need for others. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, that fortress of the mind that remains unshakable regardless of external circumstances. But here's what most people miss about solitude. It's not about avoiding people. It's about becoming someone whose company you actually enjoy. Think about the people in your life who seem desperate for attention. They dominate conversations not because they have important things to say, but because they can't tolerate silence. They make plans constantly, not because they love activities, but because they can't stand the thought of an empty evening. They scroll endlessly through social media, not because they're interested in what others are doing, but because they're avoiding dealing with their own thoughts and feelings. What they're really telling you is that they find their own inner world so uncomfortable that they need constant external stimulation to avoid confronting it. They've never learned to be friends with themselves. But the person who has mastered comfortable solitude, they move through the world differently. They don't need to be the center of attention because they've found their center within themselves. They can listen without needing to interrupt because they're not desperate to prove their worth through words. They can be present without needing to perform because they've learned that their value doesn't depend on others' reactions. They've developed what the Stoics called autarkia, self-sufficiency. Not the kind that rejects all human connection, but the kind that enters relationships from a position of strength rather than need. This is why growth feels isolating at first. You're developing a tolerance, even a preference, for your own company. And that makes you less available for the kind of shallow social interactions that most people use to fill the void inside themselves. When you can sit with yourself without entertainment, without distraction, without the need to be doing something productive every moment, you discover things about yourself that constant activity keeps hidden. You start to hear your own voice beneath all the noise of other people's opinions and expectations. You begin to understand what you actually think, not what you think you should think. You discover what you actually want, not what others want for you. You uncover what you actually value, not what you've been told to value. But here's where it gets challenging. This self-knowledge often reveals gaps between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. It shows you the compromises you've made, the parts of yourself you've hidden, the dreams you've abandoned to fit in with others' expectations. Sitting in solitude, you can't hide from these realizations. You can't distract yourself from the uncomfortable truth that maybe you've been living someone else's life, following someone else's script, pursuing someone else's definition of success. The Stoics practiced what they called anasis, self-examination, not self-criticism, but honest assessment. Who am I when nobody's watching? What do I think about when there's nothing I have to think about? What kind of person emerges when all the masks come off? These aren't easy questions, and the answers aren't always comfortable. But they're necessary. Because until you know who you really are, you can't become who you're meant to be. Seneca wrote extensively about his evening practice of reviewing the day, not just what happened, but how he responded, what he learned, where he could improve. This wasn't self-flagellation, it was self-cultivation. He was using solitude as a workshop for character development. Here's the practical piece. Start with 15 minutes a day. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just sit with yourself. Notice what comes up. The urge to check something, do something, be somewhere else. That urge is showing you exactly how much work needs to be done. Don't try to quiet your mind or achieve some Zen state. Simply observe what your mind does when it's not being directed toward external tasks. Notice the thoughts that arise, the feelings that surface, the patterns that emerge. You might discover that you're angrier than you realized, or sadder, or more ambitious, or more afraid. These discoveries aren't problems to be solved. They're information to be integrated. They're the raw material from which authentic strength is built. As you develop comfort with solitude, you'll notice changes in how you relate to others. You'll be less needy in relationships because you're not using other people to escape from yourself. You'll be more selective about social activities because you've learned to distinguish between connections that energize you and those that drain you. You'll find that you can enjoy parties more because you're there by choice, not from fear of being alone. You can leave conversations that don't interest you without feeling guilty because you have somewhere good to go, back to yourself. People will notice this change. They'll comment that you've become more independent, maybe even more mysterious. What they're really sensing is that you no longer need their presence to feel complete. And that, paradoxically, makes you more attractive to the kind of people worth knowing. The person who has mastered comfortable solitude doesn't avoid the crowd. They move through it with quiet confidence, knowing that their peace comes from within, not from the applause of others. They've learned the secret that all great leaders, artists, and thinkers have discovered. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. When you can sit in silence and feel contentment rather than anxiety, when you can spend time alone and feel energized rather than depleted, when you can be by yourself and feel whole rather than incomplete, that's when you've built the foundation for all other forms of strength. Because everything else, your career, your relationships, your contribution to the world, flows from this core stability. When you're comfortable with who you are in solitude, you can be authentic with others. When you enjoy your own company, you can offer genuine companionship. When you've found your center within yourself, you can remain balanced no matter what storms rage around you. This is the first key, and it's foundational to all the others. Master the art of comfortable solitude, and you've taken the first step toward becoming truly dangerous in the best possible way. Imagine walking into work tomorrow and having your boss praise you to the skies in front of the entire team. Your project was brilliant. Your presentation was flawless. You're exactly the kind of employee they need more of. You feel a surge of validation, of pride, of confirmation that you're on the right track. Then, an hour later, you're in a different meeting where a colleague tears apart that same work. They question your methodology, criticize your conclusions, suggest that you've completely missed the point. Same project, same effort, completely opposite reactions. What happens to your emotional state? If you're like most people, you ride an exhausting roller coaster, euphoric from the praise, devastated by the criticism, confused about which reaction reflects reality. But what if neither response touched you? What if you remained steady, focused on the work itself rather than other people's opinions of it? What if you could extract useful information from both responses while letting neither one determine your sense of worth? This is what the Stoics called indifference to externals. Not indifference to people, but indifference to their power to determine your worth through their momentary reactions and shifting opinions. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people never recognize. Both excessive praise and harsh criticism serve the same function. They keep you externally focused. The person who lives for applause is just as enslaved as the person who's crushed by disapproval. They're both letting others write their emotional script. Think about someone you know who seems to need constant validation. They fish for compliments in conversations. They share their achievements, hoping for recognition. They take criticism personally, becoming defensive or devastated when someone disagrees with them. What you're observing is someone whose sense of self-worth is completely dependent on external feedback. Now think about someone who seems genuinely unshakably confident, not arrogant, not dismissive of others' input, but genuinely unaffected by the emotional weather of those around them. They listen to praise without letting it inflate their ego. They consider criticism without letting it deflate their spirit. They seem to have an internal compass that remains steady regardless of what others say or do. What's the difference between these two people? The second person has developed what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of perception, the ability to separate useful information from empty emotional manipulation. Marcus Aurelius had more power than any human being alive in his time, surrounded by people who would tell him exactly what they thought he wanted to hear. Senators, advisors, citizens, all with their own agendas, all trying to influence him through praise or pressure. Yet he wrote, "How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This wasn't about ignoring others or becoming antisocial. It was about recognizing that other people's reactions tell you more about them than they tell you about your work, your worth, or your direction. Let's break this down practically. When someone praises you, what are they really telling you? Sometimes they're giving you genuine feedback about the quality of your effort. But often they're trying to make you feel good because it makes them feel good. They're being polite. They're trying to motivate you. They're seeking to build rapport. The praise may be sincere, but it's not necessarily accurate or useful. Similarly, when someone criticizes you, what are they really communicating? Sometimes they're offering valuable insight that could help you improve, but often they're expressing their own frustration, insecurity, or different preferences. They're having a bad day. They're threatened by your success. They're projecting their own standards onto your work. The person who has developed immunity to praise and criticism has learned to parse these reactions strategically. They ask themselves, is this person qualified to judge this particular thing? Are they speaking from wisdom or from their own emotional state? What, if anything, can I learn here regardless of how it's delivered? This immunity doesn't happen overnight. It requires conscious practice, especially because we're wired to care about social approval. Our ancestors' survival depended on staying in good standing with the group. That programming runs deep. But here's what the Stoics understood. In the modern world, this programming often works against us. The groups we're part of now are much larger and more diverse than ancient tribes. It's impossible to please everyone, and trying to do so leads to paralysis, compromise of your values, and exhaustion. Seneca wrote about this challenge extensively. As one of Rome's most prominent citizens, he was constantly subject to public opinion, praised by some, criticized by others, often for the same actions. He learned to focus on what the Stoics called preferred indifference, outcomes that were generally positive but not essential to his well-being or character. Praise was pleasant when it came, but he didn't need it to feel good about his efforts. Criticism was sometimes useful, but he didn't let it destroy his confidence or derail his direction. Both were just information to be processed, not commands to be obeyed. Let me give you a practical framework for developing this immunity. Before reacting to any feedback, positive or negative, pause and ask yourself these questions. First, what was my intention with this work? Did I give my best effort with the resources and knowledge I had available? Did I act in accordance with my values? These questions help you locate your sense of satisfaction internally rather than externally. Second, what can I learn from this response? Is there useful information here about how I could improve, regardless of how it's being delivered? Sometimes harsh criticism contains valuable insights. Sometimes effusive praise reveals blind spots you hadn't considered. Third, what does this response tell me about the person giving it? Are they speaking from expertise or emotion? Are they trying to help me grow or trying to make themselves feel better? Understanding their motivation helps you calibrate how much weight to give their opinion. Fourth, how does this align with responses I've gotten from other qualified sources? One person's opinion is just data. Multiple informed perspectives start to form a pattern worth considering. Now, let me tell you what happens when you start practicing this approach. People begin to notice that you don't get defensive when challenged. You don't need to justify yourself or argue your point unless the conversation is genuinely productive. You simply listen, consider, and respond from a place of inner stability. This drives some people crazy, especially those who are used to getting emotional reactions from others. They're accustomed to being able to manipulate through praise or punishment. And when you remain steady, they realize their power over you has evaporated. But it also earns you a different kind of respect. People start to see you as someone who can handle difficult conversations without losing your composure. They begin to trust your opinions more because they know you're not just telling them what they want to hear. They recognize that your confidence isn't brittle, it doesn't shatter under pressure. More importantly, you become more generous with both praise and criticism. When you're not hungry for validation, you can give it more freely to others. When criticism doesn't wound you, you can offer it more constructively when it's needed. You develop what the Stoics called equanimity, evenness of mind. Like a mountain, weather happens around you, but it doesn't move you. People can have their opinions, their reactions, their judgments. You acknowledge them, learn from them when appropriate, but your core remains untouchable. This equanimity allows you to take bigger risks. Because you're not paralyzed by fear of criticism, it allows you to maintain higher standards because you're not tempted to lower them for applause. It allows you to stay true to your vision even when others don't understand it, because their understanding isn't necessary for your progress. But perhaps most importantly, this immunity frees up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy. Think about how much time and effort most people spend managing their image, seeking approval, defending themselves from criticism, or recovering from emotional wounds inflicted by others' words. When you're no longer controlled by others' opinions, all that energy becomes available for more productive uses, actually improving your work, deepening your relationships, pursuing meaningful goals, developing your character. The person who has developed immunity to praise and criticism doesn't avoid feedback. They seek it out, knowing they can handle whatever they receive with wisdom and grace. They become like a master craftsman who welcomes both appreciation for their work and suggestions for improvement, because both serve the ultimate goal of excellence. This is the second key to growing strong without breaking, developing the internal stability that allows you to remain yourself, regardless of what others say about you. It's not about becoming callous or indifferent to people. It's about becoming unshakable in your sense of self-worth, so you can engage with others from a position of strength rather than need. There's a story about a young Stoic philosopher who was traveling to give an important lecture when a severe storm struck his ship. The vessel was wrecked on rocky shores, and he lost everything: his carefully prepared notes, his personal possessions, nearly his life. When he finally reached shore, soaked, shivering, and empty-handed, someone in the crowd asked him what he planned to do about his ruined presentation. Without hesitation, he replied, "The shipwreck will be my lecture." This story captures something revolutionary that the Stoics understood about the nature of difficulty. Obstacles aren't interruptions to your growth. They are your growth. Most people experience setbacks as evidence that something is wrong, that they're off course, that life is working against them. They ask, "Why me?" They look for someone to blame. They wait for conditions to improve before moving forward. They spend their energy fighting reality instead of adapting to it. But here's what Marcus Aurelius discovered and wrote about extensively. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This isn't positive thinking or motivational rhetoric. It's a fundamental reframe of what difficulty means and how it functions in a human life. Think about the strongest person you know, not physically, but mentally and emotionally resilient. Now think about their story. I guarantee you'll find that their strength wasn't built during comfortable periods. It was forged in crisis, shaped by loss, hardened by the exact challenges they didn't want to face. Their divorce taught them self-reliance. Their financial struggle taught them resourcefulness. Their health crisis taught them what really matters. Their career setback taught them adaptability. The obstacles that could have broken them instead became the raw material from which their character was built. This is what the Stoics meant by amor fati, love of fate. Not passive acceptance of whatever happens, but active embrace of difficulty as the means through which strength is developed. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. You lose your job, a genuine crisis that threatens your financial security and professional identity. You have two fundamental choices in how to respond. The first response is what most people do: panic, blame, and wait. They focus on how unfair it is, how the company made a mistake, how the economy is terrible. They send out desperate applications, take whatever they can get, and spend months or years feeling bitter about what happened to them. The second response is what the obstacle-transformed person does. They use the crisis as information and opportunity. They assess what led to the job loss. Were there skills they lacked, performance issues they ignored, industry changes they didn't anticipate. They use the forced break to reassess their career direction. Was this job actually aligned with their values and goals, or were they just going through the motions? They might discover that losing the job was the push they needed to start the business they'd been thinking about for years, or to switch industries to something they're more passionate about, or to develop new skills that make them more valuable in the marketplace. Same situation, completely different outcome. One person is diminished by the experience. The other is strengthened by it. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before becoming one of history's most influential teachers, understood this principle intimately. His physical bondage could have destroyed his spirit, but instead it taught him that true freedom exists in the mind. His disability could have limited his potential, but instead it forced him to develop inner resources that most people never discover. He taught his students, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This isn't about controlling outcomes. You can't control whether you get fired, whether you get sick, whether relationships end, whether investments fail. But you can control your response, and that response determines whether difficulty diminishes you or develops you. The Stoics identified several types of obstacles and how each one serves as training for different aspects of character. Physical challenges train endurance and acceptance. When your body fails you, when energy is limited, when pain is present, you learn to work with what you have rather than waiting for perfect conditions. Financial pressure trains resourcefulness and priority setting. When money is scarce, you discover what you actually need versus what you merely want. You develop creative problem-solving skills and learn to find value in unexpected places. Relationship conflicts train patience and communication skills. When people disappoint you, betray you, or simply misunderstand you, you learn to set boundaries, to forgive strategically, and to build connections based on authenticity rather than convenience. Professional setbacks train adaptability and resilience. When projects fail, when recognition doesn't come, when careers stall, you learn to find satisfaction in effort rather than outcomes, and to build skills that serve you regardless of circumstances. Social rejection trains independence and self-validation. When groups exclude you, when trends pass you by, when you don't fit in, you learn to find your center within yourself rather than in others' approval. Each type of obstacle develops specific capacities that comfort cannot provide. This is why the person committed to growth often feels isolated. They're moving toward challenges while others are moving away from them. But here's where this principle becomes practically powerful. When you start viewing obstacles as training equipment, you stop avoiding difficulty. You don't seek out unnecessary hardship, but you stop running from necessary challenges. You approach problems differently. Instead of asking, "How can I get around this?" you ask, "How can I get stronger from this?" Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of, "When will this be over?" you ask, "How can I use this?" This shift in perspective is transformative because it moves you from a victim mindset to what psychologists call a growth mindset. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstances, you're in collaboration with them. Let me give you the practical framework for implementing this. When you encounter any setback, Immediately ask yourself these questions. What skill could this situation help me develop? Maybe the financial pressure forces you to learn better money management. Maybe the relationship conflict teaches you to communicate more clearly. Maybe the health challenge shows you the importance of self-care. What weakness is this exposing that I can now address? Often, obstacles reveal gaps in our preparation, knowledge, or character that we've been able to ignore during easier times. Use the difficulty as a diagnostic tool. How might this redirect me toward something better? Sometimes what feels like a setback is actually a course correction. The closed door forces you to find the open window. The ended relationship makes space for a better one. What would someone I admire do in this exact situation? Think of historical figures, mentors, or people you respect who faced similar challenges. How did they respond? What can you learn from their example? The Stoics practiced what they called premeditation of evils, regularly imagining how they would handle various difficulties before those difficulties arose. This wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. They were training their minds to see obstacles as opportunities before they were emotionally invested in a particular outcome. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The power isn't in controlling what happens to you. It's in controlling what you make of what happens to you. This is why the obstacle-transformed person often seems almost grateful for their difficulties. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they recognize how much stronger, wiser, and more capable those difficulties made them. They understand something that comfort seekers never learn. The muscle doesn't grow from the easy repetitions. It grows from the ones that challenge it beyond its current capacity. The same principle applies to character, wisdom, and every other form of inner strength. When you master this key, people notice that setbacks don't break you. They bend you into stronger shapes. They see that what would devastate others only makes you more resourceful. They see that you've become what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragile, not just resilient, but actually improved by stress. The transformed mind sees every difficulty as a question. How will I let this make me better? And that question, consistently applied, turns every obstacle into an ally, every setback into a setup, every challenge into a chance to become more of who you're meant to be. Picture two people working at the same company, doing similar jobs, producing comparable results. On the surface, they appear nearly identical in their professional output. But if you watch closely, you'll notice something fundamentally different about how they approach their work. The first person is constantly checking the room. Their effort fluctuates based on who's watching. When the boss is around, they work intensely. When supervision is light, they slack off. They do just enough to meet stated expectations, calibrating their energy based on what they think will get them noticed, promoted, or praised. Their internal dialogue is dominated by external considerations. Will this impress my manager? How does this compare to what my colleagues are doing? What's the minimum I can do and still look good? How can I position myself to get ahead? The second person arrives each day with their own internal measuring stick. They work with the same intensity whether the boss is present or not. They maintain their standards even when no one would notice if they cut corners. Their effort is consistent because it's not dependent on external monitoring or recognition. Their internal dialogue focuses on different questions. Did I do my best work with the resources available? Does this meet my personal standards of quality? Am I developing skills and contributing value? Am I becoming the kind of person I respect? Which person do you think feels more confident at the end of each day? Which one sleeps better? Which one is building real strength that will serve them regardless of changing circumstances? This is the power of what the Stoics called virtue. Not moral superiority over others, but internal standards that don't fluctuate based on external circumstances, other people's expectations, or momentary pressures. Marcus Aurelius, who held ultimate power in the Roman world, wrote, How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. This wasn't about ignoring others or becoming antisocial. It was about locating his sense of success and satisfaction internally rather than in comparison to others or in their approval. Here's what most people miss about standards. External standards are always moving targets. Your boss's expectations change based on company priorities, market conditions, and their own career pressures. Society's definitions of success evolve with cultural trends and economic cycles. Other people's approval depends on their mood, their problems, their own insecurities, and dozens of factors that have nothing to do with you. But internal standards? They're yours. They're stable. They're always available for reference, regardless of what's happening around you. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Suppose you decide that reliability is a core part of your character. You commit to showing up on time, following through on promises, and doing what you say you'll do. This isn't because others are watching, or because you'll be punished if you don't. It's because this is who you've decided to be. Now watch what happens over time. When others are casual about commitments, you remain precise. When others make excuses for delays or failures, you find solutions and alternatives. When others lower their standards under pressure, yours remain constant. This consistency does something powerful. It builds what the Stoics called self-respect. Not arrogance or superiority, but genuine confidence that comes from knowing you can count on yourself to behave according to your values, regardless of circumstances. But here's where it gets challenging. Living by internal standards means you'll often do more than is required and receive less recognition than you deserve. You'll maintain your integrity even when it costs you opportunities. You'll choose the difficult right path even when the easy wrong path is available and no one would know the difference. The Stoics were clear about this. Virtue is its own reward. The satisfaction of living according to your values is not dependent on others recognizing, appreciating, or rewarding those values. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, wrote extensively about this principle. He could have used his money and influence to cut corners, to buy his way out of difficulties, to live by different rules than ordinary people. Instead, he held himself to higher standards precisely because he had more resources and opportunities. He wrote, "The willing destiny guides them. The unwilling destiny drags them." When you have clear internal standards, you're willing. You're choosing your direction based on your values rather than being pulled along by circumstances, other people's expectations, or momentary pressures. This creates a different relationship with success and failure. When you succeed according to external measures, getting promoted, earning recognition, achieving visible goals, you can enjoy these outcomes without becoming dependent on them for your sense of worth. When you fail according to external measures, you can learn from the experience without being devastated by it, because your core sense of integrity remains intact. Let me give you the practical framework for building unshakable internal standards. Step 1. Define your non-negotiables. Identify 5 to 7 core principles that you will not compromise regardless of circumstances. Not abstract ideals like be good, but specific behavioral standards. For example, always tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient or costly. Keep your word, even in small matters that no one else would notice. Treat people with respect, regardless of their status or what they can do for you. Do quality work whether anyone notices or not. Take responsibility for mistakes immediately, rather than making excuses. Show up fully to commitments, rather than going through the motions. Step 2. Apply them universally. These standards apply regardless of what others are doing. If everyone around you is cutting corners, you don't. If everyone else is gossiping or complaining, you don't participate. If everyone else is phoning it in, you bring your full effort. This universal application is crucial because it's what transforms these from situational guidelines into character traits. Your integrity isn't dependent on others' integrity. Your work ethic isn't dependent on others' work ethic. Your standards are yours. Step 3. Measure internally. Each day, assess yourself against these standards rather than against external outcomes. Did you act according to your values? Did you give your best effort with what was available to you? Did you treat people well? Did you keep your commitments to yourself and others? These questions create an internal scorecard that's always available and never dependent on others' judgments or changing circumstances. Step 4. Adjust, based on learning, not pressure. Internal standards should evolve as you grow and learn, but they shouldn't fluctuate based on external pressure. If you discover that one of your standards isn't serving you or others well, you can thoughtfully modify it. But you don't lower your standards just because maintaining them becomes difficult or unpopular. Now, here's what happens when you consistently live by internal standards. People notice something different about you, even if they can't articulate what it is. It's not charisma or charm, it's integrity. It's the sense that this person has something solid at their core, something that doesn't shift with changing winds. You become someone who can be counted on. Your word means something because it's backed by consistent action. Your presence brings stability to whatever environment you enter because people sense that you're not performing for them. You're being yourself. But perhaps most importantly, you develop what the Stoics called ataraxia, untroubled peace of mind. Because you're living according to your own carefully chosen values, rather than trying to meet everyone else's shifting expectations, you have a clear conscience and a stable sense of self-worth. This doesn't mean you become rigid or judgmental toward others who operate differently. In fact, the opposite often happens. When your own standards are clear and stable, you become less judgmental of others because you're not threatened by their different approaches. You can appreciate their choices without needing to adopt them or defend against them. People will test these standards, especially as they recognize that you operate differently than most. They'll invite you to compromise just this once. They'll suggest that nobody will know if you cut corners. They'll argue that everyone else does it, so why shouldn't you? This is where your strength is either proven or revealed as superficial. The person with genuinely unshakable internal standards doesn't need to defend them extensively or explain them to everyone. They simply live them consistently, and that consistency speaks louder than any justification could. You become someone whose reputation precedes you, not because you're trying to build a reputation, but because your consistent behavior creates one naturally. People know what to expect from you because your actions are predictable in the best possible way. You can be trusted to do what you said you'd do, to maintain quality even when no one's checking, to treat people well even when there's no advantage in doing so. This creates a compound effect over time. Each choice to maintain your standards, especially when it would be easier to compromise, builds what the Stoics called character. And character, once established, makes future decisions easier because you've already decided who you are and how you behave. The person with unshakable internal standards doesn't agonize over every choice because their values provide a clear framework for decision-making. They don't spend energy wondering what others will think because their own approval carries more weight than external validation. This is why external validation becomes less necessary over time. You have an internal reference point that tells you when you're living up to your own standards, and that internal approval proves to be more satisfying and stable than all the external praise in the world. Here's a scene that plays out everywhere, every day. Someone starts growing, developing discipline, reading meaningful books, taking their life seriously. They're excited about their progress, inspired by new insights, energized by the changes they're making. Naturally, they want to share this excitement with the people closest to them. So they talk about their new perspectives. They mention the book that changed their thinking. They explain why they're making different choices. They share their plans for continued growth and development. And the people around them, family members, old friends, longtime colleagues, react with skepticism, jokes, or outright dismissal. Look who thinks they're a philosopher now. Must be nice to have all that time for self-improvement. You used to be more fun. Don't get too deep on us. The growing person is faced with a painful choice. defend themselves and their new direction, potentially creating conflict with people they care about, or close off entirely, sharing nothing about their inner world and feeling increasingly isolated from those around them. Both responses are mistakes that miss a crucial understanding about human nature and relationships. The Stoics understood something fundamental. Not everyone is ready for your truth, and your growth doesn't require their understanding or approval. Epictetus taught his students a principle that seems simple but requires sophisticated application. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. In other words, stop trying to convince people of your new direction. Simply walk it, and let your results speak for themselves. But this raises a deeper question that many people struggle with. How do you stay authentic and connected to others while protecting your growth from people who aren't ready to support it? How do you maintain relationships without compromising your development or exhausting yourself trying to bring everyone along? The answer is what I call selective vulnerability, VSD. Being strategically thoughtful about what you share with whom, when, and how. Think about it this way. You wouldn't discuss advanced calculus with someone who struggles with basic arithmetic. Not because you're intellectually superior, but because they lack the foundation to engage meaningfully with the material. Attempting such a discussion would frustrate both of you and accomplish nothing useful. The same principle applies to personal growth and philosophical insights. When you're developing new habits, perspectives, and standards, you need the right environment for those changes to take root and flourish. Like a seedling that needs shelter from harsh winds until it becomes a strong tree, your evolving self needs protection from people who might inadvertently, or sometimes intentionally, undermine your progress. This doesn't mean being secretive, superior, or dishonest. It means being wise about human nature and strategic about your relationships. Marcus Aurelius, who had to navigate complex political relationships while maintaining his philosophical commitments, understood this deeply. He shared his most profound reflections in private writings, discussed philosophy with fellow students of wisdom, but adapted his communication style when dealing with senators, soldiers, and citizens who weren't interested in or capable of engaging with deeper ideas. This wasn't manipulation or deception. It was practical wisdom about meeting people where they are while protecting what was most important to him. Here's how selective vulnerability works in practice. The inner circle, deep sharing. This consists of 1 to 3 people who genuinely support your growth, understand your values, and can engage meaningfully with your deeper thoughts and struggles. These might be mentors, fellow seekers, or friends who are on their own journey of development. With these people, you can share everything: your insights, your challenges, your failures, your breakthroughs. They get full access to your inner world because they can handle it constructively. They won't mock your efforts, dismiss your struggles, or try to pull you back to your old patterns. These relationships are characterized by mutual growth, honest feedback, and support for each other's highest aspirations. Conversations go deep quickly, and both parties leave feeling energized and understood. The middle circle, outcome sharing. This includes friends and family members who care about you but may not understand your current direction or may feel threatened by your changes. They love you, but they're not necessarily equipped to support your growth process. With these people, you share outcomes rather than processes. They hear about your promotion, but not about the daily discipline that earned it. They learn about your improved relationships, but not about the philosophical work you did to become more patient and understanding. They see your increased confidence, but you don't discuss the vulnerability work that created it. This isn't about being fake or distant. It's about recognizing that these relationships serve different purposes and require different boundaries. You can be genuinely warm and connected with these people without making them responsible for understanding or supporting your development. The outer circle, surface sharing. This consists of acquaintances, casual colleagues, and social contacts. They get pleasantries, shared interests, and surface-level connection. They don't need to know about your internal work, your philosophical insights, or your personal growth journey. This isn't because you don't value these people, but because these relationships don't have the depth or foundation necessary for meaningful sharing about personal development. Attempting to go deeper would be awkward for everyone involved and wouldn't serve anyone well. The key insight here is that you can be completely authentic without being indiscriminately open. You can be genuine without being unguarded. But here's the challenging part. As you grow and evolve, some people will move between these circles. A close friend who consistently undermines your growth efforts might need to move to the middle circle. A casual acquaintance who shows genuine interest in development and can engage constructively might move inward. This movement feels like loss, and it is. But it's also liberation. You're no longer spending precious energy defending your choices to people who aren't invested in your success. You're no longer diluting your focus by trying to bring everyone along on your journey. Instead, you're creating space for relationships that can genuinely support who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Seneca wrote extensively about friendship and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who inspire you to be better. But he also understood that not every relationship can or should operate at this level. Different relationships serve different purposes, and wisdom lies in recognizing these differences rather than trying to force every connection into the same mold. The person who practices selective vulnerability develops what the Stoics called prudentia, practical wisdom about human nature and relationships. They understand that sharing everything with everyone isn't honest, it's naive. They recognize that protecting your growth isn't selfish, it's necessary. This approach creates several powerful outcomes. First, you become more present and available in all your relationships because you're not exhausting yourself trying to convince skeptics or defend your choices to people who aren't genuinely curious. Second, the relationships that can handle deeper connection become genuinely nourishing rather than draining. When you're selective about who gets access to your authentic self, the people who do have that access tend to treasure it more. Third, you develop better boundaries in all areas of life. Learning to share selectively teaches you to protect your energy, time, and attention more generally. Fourth, you become more attractive to high-quality people because they recognize that you don't share your depth indiscriminately. They sense that access to your inner world is something to be earned rather than something you give away freely. This is why growth can feel lonely initially. You're being more selective about who gets to witness and participate in your authentic self-expression. But this loneliness is temporary and ultimately gives way to connections that are far more meaningful than the broad but shallow relationships that many people settle for. The quality of your relationships improves dramatically when you stop trying to be understood by everyone and start focusing on being truly known by a few people who can handle and appreciate who you really are. Over time, something interesting happens. Your example begins to influence others without you having to explain or defend anything. People in your middle and outer circles start asking what's different about you. They notice your increased confidence, your clearer boundaries, your greater peace of mind. Some will be curious enough to move closer to your inner circle. Others will simply appreciate the positive changes they observe without wanting to understand the process behind them. Both outcomes are perfectly fine. The person who has mastered selective vulnerability doesn't avoid authentic connection. They create the conditions where authentic connection can flourish. They don't hide their truth. They share it strategically with people who can receive it constructively. This key is essential because growth is fragile in its early stages. Protect it wisely, share it selectively, and watch it develop into the kind of strength that can eventually withstand any criticism or misunderstanding. Imagine working on a project for months, pouring your best effort into it, refining every detail, pushing yourself beyond what you thought possible, learning new skills in the process. You research thoroughly, execute carefully, and deliver something you're genuinely proud of. Then you finish it, present it to the world, and nothing. No recognition, no praise, no external validation that it was worthwhile. How do you feel in that moment? If your sense of accomplishment depends entirely on other people's reactions, you feel empty, disappointed, like all that effort was wasted. You start questioning whether the work was actually any good, whether you're fooling yourself about your abilities, whether it's worth continuing to put in such effort if no one notices or cares. But if you've mastered the discipline of self-validation, you feel something entirely different. You feel proud of the work itself, the growth you experienced creating it, the skills you developed, the problems you solved. You feel satisfied with your effort and commitment. You feel stronger for having pushed yourself, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes or appreciates what you accomplished. This is the difference between internal and external validation, and it's the difference between sustainable growth and constant emotional volatility based on others' shifting reactions. The Stoics understood that seeking approval from others as your primary source of satisfaction is like trying to control the weather. You can influence it somewhat through your actions, but ultimately, other people's responses are outside your direct control. And anything outside your control is a poor foundation for your sense of self-worth or motivation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest." The waves are other people's opinions, sometimes favorable, sometimes harsh, always changing based on factors that have nothing to do with the quality of your work or character. Their reactions depend on their mood, their own insecurities, their personal preferences, their current circumstances, their past experiences, and dozens of variables you can't control or even know about. The rocky headland is your ability to find satisfaction in your own effort, your own progress, your own integrity, regardless of external responses. But here's what most people get wrong about self-validation. They think it means ignoring feedback entirely or becoming arrogant and dismissive of others' input. That's not what the Stoics taught. They taught discernment, traps, the ability to separate useful information from empty praise or destructive criticism. Let me give you a practical framework for developing this discipline. When you complete something, a project at work, a workout routine, a difficult conversation, a creative endeavor, ask yourself these questions before looking for external feedback. Did I give my best effort with the resources and knowledge I had available? This isn't about perfection. It's about honest assessment of whether you brought your full attention and energy to the task. Did I act according to my values throughout the process? Did you maintain integrity in how you approached the work? Did you treat people well? Did you stay true to your standards even when it would have been easier to cut corners? What did I learn in the process? Growth is its own reward. What skills did you develop? What insights did you gain? How are you more capable now than when you started? How am I stronger, wiser, or more skilled than when I began? Focus on the internal development that occurred, regardless of external outcomes. Notice what's not on that list. What will others think? Will this get recognition? Does this meet their expectations? How does this compare to what others are doing? This doesn't mean you ignore constructive feedback when it's offered. It means you don't need external validation to feel good about your effort. You can receive praise without becoming dependent on it. You can hear criticism without being destroyed by it. Epictetus, who understood what it was like to have no external power, status, or resources, taught that true strength comes from your ability to say, "I did what was right. I gave what I had. I improved who I am. That is enough." But developing this discipline is more challenging than it sounds because we're social creatures wired to seek approval from our group. It takes conscious, sustained practice to shift from external to internal validation. Here's what that practice looks like. Daily self-assessment. Each evening, review your day before checking social media, reading emails, or discussing your experiences with others. What did you do well? What could you improve? What are you proud of? What did you learn? This creates an internal reference point that isn't dependent on others' judgments. Effort over outcome focus. Measure yourself by what you put in rather than what you get out. Did you train consistently? Did you work with focus and intention? Did you treat people well? Did you maintain your standards? These factors are within your control and therefore reliable sources of satisfaction. Process goals rather than result goals. Instead of "I want to get promoted," try "I want to do excellent work and develop leadership skills." Instead of "I want to be liked," try "I want to be kind and genuine." The first depends on others' decisions. The second depends entirely on you. Personal metrics tracking. Keep track of your own measures of progress. Days you stuck to your principles under pressure. Times you chose the more difficult but correct path. Moments you grew stronger or wiser. Instances when you helped others without seeking recognition. These victories are yours, regardless of whether anyone else notices them. Internal scorecard maintenance. Develop your own system for measuring success that doesn't depend on external validation. This might include consistency in your practices, growth in your capabilities, alignment between your values and actions, or contribution to others' well-being. Now here's what happens when you develop this discipline. You become unshakably confident. Not arrogant. Confidence built on internal validation is actually humble because it doesn't need to prove itself to others, but unshakable because it's based on something you completely control. People notice this quality immediately. They sense that you don't need their approval to feel good about yourself. They observe that you don't deflate when criticized or inflate when praised. They see someone who has found their center and doesn't need external props to maintain their balance. This makes you more attractive as a friend, partner, colleague, or leader because people sense they don't have to manage your emotions or feed your ego. You bring stability to relationships rather than neediness. You can offer genuine compliments because you're not hoarding validation for yourself. You can have difficult conversations because your self-worth isn't threatened by conflict or disagreement. But perhaps most importantly, you become free. Free from the exhausting cycle of performing for approval. Free from the disappointment of unmet expectations from others. Free from the anxiety of wondering what people think. Free to focus your energy on growth, contribution, and meaningful work rather than impression management. This freedom allows you to take bigger risks because you're not paralyzed by fear of criticism. It enables you to maintain higher standards because you're not tempted to lower them for applause. It permits you to stay true to your vision even when others don't understand it, because their understanding isn't necessary for your satisfaction or progress. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." The beginning of your self-validation discipline marks the end of others' power to control your emotional state and sense of worth through their reactions. The person who has mastered self-validation doesn't avoid recognition when it comes. They can enjoy praise without depending on it. They don't dismiss feedback. They can consider criticism without being crushed by it. They continue growing and contributing regardless of whether anyone is paying attention, because their motivation comes from within. They understand that external validation is like dessert, pleasant when available, but not necessary for nourishment. Their core satisfaction comes from the work itself, the growth it produces, and the integrity they maintain in the process. This discipline creates a virtuous cycle. The less you need validation, the more likely you are to receive it, because people are drawn to those who seem complete within themselves. The less you chase approval, the more you can focus on excellence, which naturally earns respect. The less you depend on others' opinions, the more trustworthy your own judgment becomes. But even if external recognition never comes, the person who has mastered self-validation remains satisfied, motivated, and strong. They've located their sense of worth in something stable and controllable, their own effort, growth, and integrity. This is the sixth key to growing strong without breaking: learning to find everything you need for motivation and satisfaction within yourself, while remaining open to others' input without being dependent on their approval for your sense of worth. There's a moment that happens in every office, every social gathering, every family dinner. The conversation turns toxic. Maybe it starts with gossip about someone who isn't there to defend themselves. Maybe it devolves into complaining, cynicism, or pointless argument. Maybe it's just empty noise designed to fill silence, people talking without saying anything meaningful. Everyone's participating because everyone's participating. The dynamic feeds on itself, drawing people in through social pressure and the apparent consensus that this is how time should be spent. Then, someone does something unexpected. They don't contribute to the negativity. They don't try to change the subject or lecture everyone about positivity. They don't storm out dramatically or make a scene. They simply withdraw their energy from the situation. Maybe they become quietly attentive but stop adding fuel to the conversation. Maybe they politely excuse themselves. Maybe they just stop engaging and let the discussion continue around them without their participation. Most people interpret this as antisocial behavior, rudeness, or thinking you're too good for the group. But the Stoics understood it as something else entirely: the strategic exercise of power through non-participation. Seneca wrote, "The willing destiny guides them. The unwilling destiny drags them." Strategic withdrawal is about becoming willing, consciously choosing where to invest your attention and energy, rather than being dragged along by whatever current happens to be strongest at the moment. Let me be absolutely clear. This isn't about avoiding all conflict, difficult conversations, or challenging situations. It's not about becoming a hermit or refusing to engage with the world. It's about recognizing that not every battle deserves your participation, not every argument deserves your energy, and not every social dynamic deserves your engagement. Think about the mentally and emotionally strongest people you know. They have something in common that's often overlooked. They're extremely selective about what they allow into their mental space. They don't argue with people who aren't interested in finding truth. They don't try to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They don't exhaust themselves fighting battles that can't be won or that don't serve any meaningful purpose. This selectivity isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that your attention is finite and precious, and therefore should be invested strategically where it can create the most value. Marcus Aurelius, who had to deal with endless political drama, court intrigue, and social obligations, wrote extensively about the importance of guarding your mental resources. He understood that saying yes to everything is the same as saying no to everything that matters most. Here's what strategic withdrawal looks like in different contexts. Conversational withdrawal. When a conversation becomes unproductive, gossipy, or toxic, you stop feeding it energy. You don't need to make a dramatic exit or lecture people about their behavior. You simply stop contributing. Interesting perspective, followed by thoughtful silence. The conversation either evolves to something more constructive or dies from lack of fuel. You learn to recognize the early signs. When people start speaking with more emotion than reason. When the goal shifts from understanding to winning. When the discussion becomes about attacking people rather than addressing ideas. Social withdrawal. You become less available for activities and gatherings that consistently drain your energy without providing corresponding value. You stop attending every party, accepting every invitation, or saying yes to every request for your time. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial. It means becoming intentional. You evaluate social opportunities based on whether they align with your values, contribute to your growth, or involve people who energize rather than exhaust you. Digital withdrawal. You curate your information diet deliberately. You unfollow accounts that consistently leave you feeling worse rather than better. You reduce time on platforms that promote comparison, outrage, or mindless consumption. You choose your inputs as carefully as you would choose your food. You recognize that your mental environment is as important as your physical environment. And you take responsibility for creating conditions that support your growth rather than undermine it. Emotional withdrawal. You stop absorbing other people's anxiety, drama, and negativity, as if managing their emotional state were your responsibility. You can care about people deeply without carrying their emotional burdens as your own. You learn the difference between empathy and emotional absorption. between supporting others and enabling their dysfunction, between being helpful and being used. But here's what makes strategic withdrawal truly powerful. When you stop investing energy in what doesn't serve you, that energy becomes available for what does serve you. You have more focus for your meaningful goals, more patience for relationships that matter, more strength for challenges that are actually worth facing. The Stoics understood this as a form of what they called economy of attention. Just as you wouldn't spend your financial resources on things that provide no value, you shouldn't spend your mental and emotional resources on activities, people, or situations that don't contribute to your well-being or growth. Epictetus put it perfectly. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. The same principle applies to social and mental energy. Richness consists not in being involved in everything, but in being selective about what deserves your engagement. Now, this approach will be misunderstood by some people. They'll call you aloof, antisocial, or suggest that you think you're superior to certain activities or conversations. Let them think that. Their interpretation of your boundaries is not your responsibility to manage or correct. What you're actually doing is protecting your most valuable resources, your attention, your energy, your peace of mind, so you can invest them where they'll have the greatest positive impact. Here's the practical application. Start with awareness. Begin paying attention to what energizes you versus what drains you. Not just activities, but people, conversations, environments, and even types of thoughts. Keep a simple log for a week. What left you feeling stronger and more focused? What left you feeling depleted and scattered? Gradual withdrawal. You don't need to make dramatic changes overnight. Begin slowly reducing your investment in what drains you, while gradually increasing your investment in what energizes you. Cancel one draining commitment this week. Spend 1 hour less on social media. Leave one unproductive conversation earlier than usual. Positive replacement. Don't just withdraw from negative influences. Actively engage with positive ones. Join conversations that stimulate your thinking. Spend time with people who inspire your growth. Consume content that challenges you to become better. Boundary communication. You don't need to explain your choices extensively, but you can communicate your boundaries clearly and kindly. I'm trying to be more intentional about how I spend my time. I'm focusing on other priorities right now. That's not really my area of interest. Over time, something remarkable happens. The quality of your relationships improves because you're only maintaining ones that can handle your authenticity and contribute to your well-being. The quality of your work improves because you're not scattered across meaningless activities. The quality of your inner life improves because you're not constantly processing other people's mental and emotional clutter. You become like a master sculptor, systematically removing everything that doesn't serve the final vision. What emerges is a life that actually reflects your values rather than everyone else's expectations or society's defaults. People who understand and respect boundaries will appreciate your selectivity. People who don't understand will often reveal that they were part of what needed to be withdrawn from in the first place. The power of strategic withdrawal isn't in what you avoid, it's in what you make space for. When you stop saying yes to everything, you can finally say yes to what matters most. When you stop engaging with every distraction, you can focus on what deserves your best effort. When you stop absorbing everyone's problems, you can solve the ones that are actually yours to solve. This is how you protect your growth while still remaining engaged with the world. This is how you maintain your energy for what matters while avoiding exhaustion from what doesn't. This is how you become strategically unavailable for mediocrity while remaining fully available for excellence. The person who has mastered strategic withdrawal doesn't avoid all social interaction, chapter Jal. They engage more meaningfully with fewer people and situations. They don't avoid all challenges, they choose which hills are worth climbing. They don't withdraw from life, they engage with it more intentionally and effectively. Imagine walking into any room. A high-stakes business meeting, a family gathering where tensions run high, a social event where you don't know anyone, and feeling completely at ease. Not because everyone likes you or because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you don't need them to validate your worth, provide your sense of purpose, or determine whether you belong there. Not because you don't care about people or value relationships, but because your fundamental sense of well-being doesn't depend on their approval, their presence, or their permission for you to be yourself. This is what the Stoics called the ultimate freedom, dangerous self-reliance. Dangerous not because it harms others, but because it makes you impossible to control through the usual means of social pressure, manipulation, or the withdrawal of benefits. Most people live in an intricate web of dependencies that they don't even recognize until those dependencies are threatened. They need constant validation from others to feel worthy of taking up space. They need others to make important decisions for them because they don't trust their own judgment. They need permission from authority figures to pursue their goals. They need someone else to provide meaning, direction, and purpose for their lives. But the person who has cultivated genuine self-reliance, they're free in a way that makes others profoundly uncomfortable. Because that kind of freedom is contagious, and most people prefer their comfortable chains to the uncertainty and responsibility that comes with real independence. Marcus Aurelius, who could have had anything he wanted provided by others, who was surrounded by servants, advisors, and subjects eager to anticipate his every need, wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Not because the present is all that matters, but because the present moment is the only place where you have complete control. And true control, the only kind that matters, begins and ends with yourself. Let me be very clear about what dangerous self-reliance is not. It's not isolation, misanthropy, or refusing to connect with others. It's not rejecting help, collaboration, or interdependence when appropriate. It's not emotional coldness, indifference, or lack of empathy. It's not arrogance, superiority, or thinking you don't need anyone. It's not being stubborn, inflexible, or unwilling to learn from others. What it is, the ability to find everything you fundamentally need for contentment, purpose, and strength within yourself. The capacity to be your own best company, your own most reliable source of motivation, your own harshest but fairest critic. The skill of being able to stand alone without loneliness, to make decisions without consensus, to find meaning without external validation. Here's the practical reality. A genuinely self-reliant person can enjoy relationships without being needy. They can appreciate opportunities without being desperate. They can face setbacks without being devastated. Their mood doesn't fluctuate wildly based on external circumstances because their center of gravity is internal and stable. Seneca demonstrated this principle perfectly throughout his life. He was wealthy but could live simply when circumstances required it. He was politically influential but didn't need power to feel important or valuable. He had many friends and social connections but could be alone without feeling lonely or incomplete. When Emperor Nero eventually turned against him and demanded his suicide, Seneca faced death calmly because his sense of self and purpose wasn't dependent on the emperor's favor or anyone else's approval. But here's what makes self-reliance dangerous in the most positive sense. When you don't need something, you can't be controlled by the threat of losing it. When you don't need approval, you can't be manipulated by praise or criticism. When you don't need others to provide your sense of purpose, you can't be redirected by their agendas. When you don't need external circumstances to be perfect to feel content, you can't be destabilized by change or uncertainty. This terrifies people who are used to having leverage over others. It disrupts systems and relationships built on dependency and neediness. It challenges the fundamental assumption that everyone needs to be needed, that everyone has a price, that everyone can be controlled through the right combination of rewards and punishments. The components of dangerous self-reliance, emotional independence. Your fundamental mood and sense of well-being are not determined by others' moods, reactions, or treatment of you. You can be genuinely happy while others around you are miserable. You can remain calm while others are frantic. You can maintain confidence while others are filled with doubt. This doesn't mean you're unaffected by others or lack empathy. It means you're not emotionally dependent on others for your basic psychological stability. Intellectual independence. You think for yourself, based on evidence, reason, and your own carefully examined values. You question popular opinions, challenge conventional wisdom when it doesn't make sense, and form your own conclusions rather than automatically adopting whatever position is most socially acceptable or convenient. You're willing to be wrong, to change your mind when presented with better information, but you're not swayed by social pressure, groupthink, or the desire to fit in with whatever crowd happens to be dominant at the moment. Spiritual independence. You find meaning, purpose, and connection to something larger than yourself through your own growth, contribution, and alignment with values you've chosen rather than inherited. You don't need external authorities, religious, political, or cultural, NDD, to tell you what should matter to you or how you should live. This doesn't mean rejecting all wisdom from traditions or communities, but it means taking personal responsibility for what you believe and why you believe it. Practical independence. You systematically develop skills, resources, and capabilities that reduce your dependence on others for meeting your basic needs and achieving your important goals. This includes financial independence, but also practical skills, emotional regulation abilities, problem-solving capabilities, and the kind of general competence that allows you to handle whatever life presents. But here's the paradox that confuses many people. The more genuinely self-reliant you become, the better your relationships become. Why? Because you're choosing them rather than needing them. You're bringing strength to relationships rather than seeking to extract it from them. You're contributing from abundance rather than trying to fill a void within yourself. People sense this quality immediately, even if they can't articulate what's different about you. They sense that you're with them because you want to be, not because you have to be. They sense that you're contributing to the relationship from overflow rather than desperation. They sense that you won't collapse, become vindictive, or lose your center if they have a bad day, disagree with you, or need space for their own growth. This makes you more attractive as a friend, partner, colleague, or leader, because people don't feel the subtle pressure to manage your emotions, validate your choices, or provide constant reassurance about your worth. The practice. Developing dangerous self-reliance is gradual work that requires honest self-assessment and consistent effort across multiple areas. Identify your dependencies. Where do you currently need others' approval to feel good about yourself? Where do you need others' permission to pursue your goals? Where do you need others' provision to meet your basic needs? Where do you need others' presence to feel complete? Make a list without judgment. Everyone has dependencies. The goal isn't to eliminate all of them overnight, but to become conscious of them so you can begin reducing the ones that limit your freedom and growth. Develop internal resources. Instead of needing others to motivate you, develop self-discipline and internal drive. Instead of needing others to entertain you, develop interests and activities that can sustain you alone. Instead of needing others to validate your ideas, develop critical thinking skills and trust in your own judgment. Instead of needing others to solve your problems, develop resourcefulness and problem-solving capabilities. Build practical capabilities. Learn skills that increase your options and reduce your dependence on others' goodwill or competence. This might include financial management, basic home and car maintenance, cooking, physical fitness, communication skills, or whatever areas of practical competence are relevant to your life and goals. Strengthen emotional regulation. Develop the ability to manage your emotional state regardless of external circumstances. This includes practices like meditation, journaling, exercise, or whatever methods help you maintain equilibrium when things don't go as planned. Create multiple options. In any important area of life, career, relationships, living situation, income sources. Avoid putting all your eggs in one basket. Having options reduces desperation and increases your ability to make choices based on your values rather than your fears. This is gradual work. You're not trying to become completely isolated or independent of all human connection and cooperation. You're trying to become what I think of as a strong individual within interdependent relationships, someone substantial enough to stand alone when necessary, resourceful enough to contribute meaningfully to others, and stable enough to weather any storm that comes your way. The dangerous self-reliant person doesn't avoid connection. They enter relationships from a position of strength. They don't refuse help. They're simply not desperate for it. They don't reject love or friendship. They're just not dependent on it for their basic sense of worth or purpose. Epictetus, who understood dependency intimately from his years as a slave, taught that true freedom comes when you can honestly say, "I have everything I need within me to handle whatever comes." Not because external things don't matter or because you don't value relationships and opportunities, but because your ability to respond wisely, maintain your values, and find meaning is always available to you regardless of circumstances. This understanding transforms how you move through the world. You become someone who can walk away from situations, relationships, or opportunities that don't align with your values because you're not desperate for any particular outcome. You can say no without guilt because you're not afraid of missing out. You can take risks because you're confident in your ability to handle whatever results. You become dangerous to every system, relationship, or institution that depends on people's neediness, desperation, or willingness to trade their authenticity for security, belonging, or approval. But perhaps most importantly, you become a source of strength for others rather than a drain on their resources. When people interact with you, they don't feel the subtle pressure to manage your emotions, validate your choices, or provide constant reassurance. Instead, they feel inspired by your stability, challenged by your independence, and invited to develop their own inner resources. This is why cultivating dangerous self-reliance is ultimately an act of service to others as well as yourself. When you're no longer dependent on others for your sense of worth, purpose, and emotional stability, you're free to support their growth without agenda, to love them without possessiveness, to help them without creating dependency. The world needs people like this, individuals who are strong enough to stand alone, but wise enough to choose meaningful connection, independent enough to think for themselves, but humble enough to learn from others, self-reliant enough to weather any storm, but generous enough to help others build their own shelter. We've explored 8 keys that separate those who grow genuinely strong from those who simply become hard, bitter, or brittle. Master the art of comfortable solitude, learning to be genuinely content with your own company, discovering who you are when all the masks come off, and building the foundation of inner stability that makes all other strength possible. Develop immunity to praise and criticism, creating the internal stability that allows you to remain yourself regardless of others' shifting opinions, extracting useful information from feedback without being controlled by it. Transform obstacles into training ground. 2. Recognizing that difficulties aren't interruptions to your growth, but the very mechanism through which character is built, using every challenge as raw material for becoming stronger. Build unshakable internal standards, developing your own measuring stick for success and satisfaction that doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances or other people's expectations. Practice selective vulnerability. Being strategic about what you share with whom, protecting your growth while maintaining authentic connections with people who can handle your depth. Master the discipline of self-validation. Finding satisfaction in your own effort and growth rather than depending on others' recognition. Creating sustainable motivation that doesn't require external fuel. Embrace the power of strategic withdrawal. 99. Choosing consciously where to invest your energy and attention. Protecting your resources so you can use them where they matter most. Cultivate dangerous self-reliance, developing the capacity to find everything you need for contentment and strength within yourself while remaining open to meaningful connection with others. But here's what I want you to understand as we conclude. This isn't about becoming a perfect Stoic philosopher overnight. This isn't about achieving some impossible standard of emotional invulnerability or complete independence from all human connection and support. This is about incremental, consistent progress toward genuine inner strength. The kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself through dominance or performance. The kind that doesn't break under pressure because it's built from the inside out. The kind that makes you truly dangerous to every system, relationship, or institution that depends on keeping people small, dependent, needy, and controllable. The ancient Stoics weren't trying to create emotionless robots who didn't care about anything or anyone. They were trying to create free human beings, people who could think clearly under pressure, who could maintain their values in difficult circumstances, who could find meaning and satisfaction regardless of external conditions, who could contribute to others from strength rather than neediness. And yes, this path can feel profoundly lonely at first. When you stop participating in the games that everyone else seems to be playing, when you stop feeding the dramas that everyone else finds entertaining, when you stop seeking the approval that everyone else desperately craves, you will feel isolated from the crowd. But that isolation is temporary and necessary. It's the space between who you used to be and who you're becoming. It's the cocoon that protects your transformation. It's the silence that allows you to hear your own voice underneath all the noise of other people's opinions and expectations. Because on the other side of this process, you don't find loneliness. You find selective connection with people who can match your depth and authenticity. You don't find coldness. You find warmth that isn't desperate, manipulative, or conditional. You don't find arrogance. You find confidence that doesn't need to prove itself because it's based on something real and stable. You find what Marcus Aurelius discovered during his most difficult years as emperor: the ability to remain fundamentally yourself regardless of what storms are raging around you. You find what Epictetus learned as a slave: that everything you actually need for a meaningful, satisfying life already exists within you and can't be taken away by circumstances or other people's actions. You find what Seneca knew as both a wealthy advisor and a condemned philosopher: that true wealth isn't having everything you want, but wanting nothing you don't already have. The world desperately needs people like this. Not perfect individuals who never struggle or make mistakes, but people who are committed to growing stronger rather than just more comfortable. People who can think clearly when others are panicking, who can maintain their principles when others are compromising, who can offer stability and wisdom in an increasingly unstable and confused world. If something in this extended exploration has resonated with you, if you've felt that recognition, that sense of, yes, this is what I've been trying to understand but couldn't quite articulate, then you're already on this path, whether you realize it or not. You don't need anyone's permission to continue walking it. You don't need approval from friends, family, or society to become stronger. You don't need to wait for better circumstances, more knowledge, or greater confidence to start building the kind of character that can handle whatever life presents. The Stoics understood something that most modern approaches to self-improvement miss entirely. Real, lasting change happens quietly, gradually, in the small decisions you make when nobody is watching. It happens in the discipline you maintain when motivation fails and emotions are strong. It happens in the standards you uphold when it would be so much easier to compromise. It happens in the growth you pursue when no one is applauding your efforts. You're not trying to become someone completely different from who you are now. You're trying to become who you actually are, underneath all the layers of other people's expectations, society's programming, your own fears about what authenticity might cost you, and the compromises you've made to fit in or avoid conflict. That authentic person, your truest, strongest, wisest self, is already there, waiting patiently beneath the surface. Already possessing the strength you're seeking, already containing the wisdom you need, already free from the dependencies and insecurities that currently limit your peace and power. These 8 keys aren't about creating something entirely new. They're about removing everything that's covering up what was always true about you. They're about clearing away the debris of false beliefs, unhealthy dependencies, and borrowed values so that your authentic self can finally emerge and express itself fully. The path we've explored together is simple in concept but demanding in execution. It requires you to value your own growth more than others' comfort with your stagnation. It requires you to choose truth over popularity, authenticity over approval, strength over safety. It requires you to build something real and lasting instead of just managing appearances and avoiding discomfort. But every person who has ever lived a life worth remembering, every leader who has made a meaningful difference, every individual who has contributed something valuable to the world, has had to make these same fundamental choices. They chose to become who they actually were rather than who others wanted them to be. They chose to grow strong rather than just grow old. They chose to face the challenges of authenticity rather than settle for the false security of conformity. The Stoics chose authenticity over approval, growth over comfort, meaning over pleasure, contribution over consumption. Not because they were superhuman or because they didn't struggle with the same fears and desires that everyone faces, but because they understood that this is the only path to genuine satisfaction and peace of mind. You have that same choice available to you right now. Not someday when conditions are perfect, not when you feel completely ready, not when other people support your decision or understand your direction. Right now, in this moment, with whatever circumstances currently surround you. The question isn't whether you can become this kind of person. The capacity is already within you. The question isn't whether you deserve to be strong, free, and authentic. You do, simply by virtue of being human. The question is, will you choose it? Will you commit to the daily practices, the difficult decisions, the gradual but consistent growth that transforms potential into reality? The ancient philosophers whose wisdom we've explored are no longer here, but their insights remain as relevant and powerful as ever. The external circumstances of life have changed dramatically over the centuries, but human nature, the challenges of growth, and the principles of inner strength remain constant. The same practices that created unshakable character 2,000 years ago will create it today in anyone willing to apply them consistently. The same choices that led to genuine freedom and satisfaction in ancient Rome will lead to them now, for anyone courageous enough to prioritize authenticity over approval. You don't need to be perfect to begin this journey. You don't need to change everything about yourself overnight. You don't need to have all the answers or feel completely confident in your direction. You just need to choose one key from what we've discussed and start practicing it consistently, honestly, with patience for the gradual process of real transformation. Maybe you start with comfortable solitude, spending 15 minutes each day sitting quietly with yourself, getting acquainted with who you are when all the distractions fade away. Maybe you begin with internal standards, defining 3 core principles you'll maintain regardless of external pressures. Maybe you focus on strategic withdrawal, consciously reducing your investment in activities and relationships that drain your energy without providing corresponding value. The specific starting point matters less than the commitment to start and the consistency to continue. Small, daily actions compound over time into dramatic changes in character, capability, and life circumstances. The person who meditates for 10 minutes daily for a year becomes fundamentally different from who they were before. The person who maintains high standards consistently, even in small matters, develops unshakable integrity. The person who practices strategic withdrawal gradually creates a life aligned with their deepest values. This work begins now if you choose it. This path opens before you the moment you decide that growing strong matters more than staying comfortable, that becoming authentic matters more than remaining popular, that building something real matters more than managing something false. The world will always try to pull you back toward mediocrity, toward comfort, toward the familiar patterns that keep you small, manageable, and predictable. But you have something the world cannot touch or diminish: the power to choose your response to whatever happens, the ability to decide what kind of person you become regardless of circumstances, the freedom to align your actions with your deepest values whether or not anyone else understands or supports your choices. That choice, made consistently and courageously over time, is how ordinary people become extraordinary, how followers become leaders, how victims transform into victors, how the weak become genuinely strong without becoming hard or cruel. The path of the Stoic isn't about achieving perfection. It's about embracing the process of becoming more yourself, more capable, more free with each passing day. It's about building the kind of character that can handle whatever challenges arise, while maintaining inner peace, authentic relationships, and meaningful contribution to the world. That work, that choice, that path is available to you right now. The only question remaining is what you'll do with the time and opportunities you have, starting today. The ancient wisdom is here. The practical methods are clear. The choice is always yours. What will you choose?